So I'm going to read it in Hebrew a second, and it reads like this: Hashem, Erech Apayim v'Rav Chesed, Nosei Avon v'Fasha, v'Nakeh lo yinakeh, Poked Avon Avot al Banim al Shileshim v'al Ribeim. This is actually an abridged version of the 13 principles of mercy that God spoke to Moses, the sin of the golden calf. It's an abridged version. The longer version had 13 principles, or 13 measures of God's mercy, and this one, according to the sages, only has 9. How you exactly count 9, I don't want to get into it. It's a detail here. But what I want to stress is that most people don't know that there are 2 sets of God revealing His attributes in the Torah. The first one was again. I'll try this again. So there are 2 sets of God revealing His attributes. The one was right after the sin of the golden calf. The second one is here in our parsha. And each time He reveals something else. The first time He revealed 13 attributes, or principles of mercy as they're called. And now, after the sin of the spies, He's revealed 9. So how many altogether? Now, in a certain sense, the 9 are just a subset of the 13, but we'll see in a moment how this is interpreted. So how many altogether? 13 plus 9 is 22. So right away you see that there must be some connection here to the 22 letters of the alphabet. So how does this work exactly? So in Kabbalah, the way this was explained is that the 13 measures, the 13 attributes, they describe God's will. The 9 attributes, they describe His, what we would call, emotional faculties. Now this is kind of strange to say this because God's neither this nor that. But the way to understand it is that the way the Kabbalists build it is that really we're talking about the ways in which we grasp God. So we have, after the sin of the golden calf, which was a sin against the giving of the Torah, which is God's will. So He needed to reveal 13 attributes of mercy, which are His essence, and He's revealing them because they are what safeguard His will. In other words, that will by itself could be very, how shall I say it, overwhelming. God's will is infinite. If it was just coming out directly the way it is, there would be no way for the world to contain it. So the understanding is that there have to be attributes of mercy. There have to be some measures that limit it, they contract the will. And these are called the 13 tikkunim, or 13 garments of Ari Chanpin, of the crown. And the way that the Kabbalists describe it in the Zohar is that this is like the beard of the crown. What do we mean by a beard? A beard, a lot of people think that a beard is manly. But really the beard is a symbol of compassion. It is what actually allows the person, as it were, to connect with reality in a way that would not be overwhelming for reality. So the beard is actually, in Judaism, it's seen as a symbol of the man's compassion for the world. And so when you really get into it, they divide the beard itself into 13 areas. We're not going to get into all that. We want to go somewhere else. The 9 measures that He reveals in our parsha, they are about something entirely different. Here the sin was against going into the land of Israel. Going into the land of Israel, as we explained yesterday, is about rectifying the emotions. The 7 Canaanite nations that we said represent the 7 emotional faculties from loving kindness to kingdom. And these need to be rectified. So when they rejected the land and they didn't want to go in, so that was like saying, I don't want to work on my emotional character. That's what they were saying. That's why they preferred to stay in the wilderness. In order to do that, for a person to work with themselves, let's call it, to be able to drive themselves properly and not get too frustrated with their development, not to get too frustrated with their emotions, with how they are. They know it, like we said, it could take a lifetime. And sometimes even that's not enough to rectify anything in our hearts, in our character, as far as our emotions go. So for that not to happen, there has to be a limit on what we call the will of the heart. There's also a will in the heart to change, and that also has to be contracted in a certain sense. It has to speak to reality at reality's pace and not go too fast. So that is called the beard of the small countenance. The first one we mentioned, the Richanpin, that's the crown, that's the large countenance, as it's called, or the great countenance, the great face. But the lower face, the smaller face, the Eranpin, that's what each person harbors in their heart. And that also has a beard, but that beard has 9 contractions to it, or 9, as we see here, principles, attributes of mercy. So we have 13 and 9. In previous generations, it was known the number 13 in Judaism is very important. Not so many people know how the number 9 is important. But why is 13 so important? Because Maimonides in the Middle Ages, he wrote a list of 13 principles of faith. And that really fits the crown, because that's where the place of faith is. I don't want to get into those 13 principles. What I want to say is that if there are 13 principles that belong to the crown, there are also 9 principles, it stands to reason, there should be 9 principles of faith that relate to the emotions and the ability of the emotions to develop properly in order to guide the person in the right way. Now, I don't know if anybody before Rav Ginsburg talked about this, but what he did was, he said, okay, if this is how it is, we need to identify 9 new principles of faith that come from Hasidic literature. Why from Hasidic literature? Because that's what Hasidut is about. Hasidus is about the person rectifying their emotional being. So what are these 9? We're just going to list them. We're not going to have time to go over them, and not even to detail how they relate each one to the particular attribute of mercy that it's connected to. So we'll just mention them. And God willing, at some point, maybe we'll have an opportunity to really explain this. But really, each one of them is a class in and of itself. There's so much to say about it. So the first one, which corresponds to wisdom, is that a new interpretation of Torah will emerge from me. This is one of the big principles of the Baal Shem Tov, that we are now understanding the Torah in a new way. The Torah doesn't change, the text stays the same. But the understanding, as the sages said, that the Torah of this world compared to the Torah of Mashiach is like vapor. It's nothing compared to the depth of the explanation. Doesn't mean that it contradicts, it just means that the depth becomes so much greater that you feel that what was before is really not worth talking about. It's so included within the new interpretation. In understanding, we find that divine service is needed above. This was a very scary proposition in previous generations, to say that God needs me to do the commandments, that He has some dependency. God can do anything He wants. So if He wanted to create a world in which He has a dependency, He has a dependency. The third one is corresponds to loving kindness, and this is the big one by the Baal Shem Tov. The recreation of all of creation happens at every moment, and its corollary, which is that divine providence goes down to the minutest detail. With might, we have a very important principle that even in sin, the descent is needed for the ultimate elevation. That even all the sins that happen in the world, everything that is done improperly, immorally, and so on, every sin that was done is in the end serving the greater elevation in the end. With Tiferet, beauty, we have that God craves a dwelling place below. With victory, we have to just finish, so I'll do this quickly. With victory, we have that the tzaddik decrees and God performs. That God gave the tzaddikim, He gave the righteous individuals the power to decree things. and then God listens to them and He performs it. Obviously, the tzaddik himself cannot create a miracle, but God listens to them. In acknowledgement, we have something of the opposite, which is that God makes a decree, and the tzaddik was given permission to annul it. In foundation, we have the principle of your people are all righteous, that every single Jew internally is a tzaddik. And finally, in kingdom, we have the segula, the uniqueness of the land of Israel, and the holiness of the Jewish body. And God willing, like I said, at some point when we have an opportunity, maybe give a series of classes on these to understand them better, but they all come from this similar episode to what happened after the creation of the golden calf, and the rejection of the land of Israel led to the revelation of these attributes so as not to destroy the people. And then these attributes are all intrinsically connected to the land of Israel. They have to do with allowing the people to eventually return there. Then it took 38 years. In our present day, it took maybe 2,000 years. Who knows how long it really will take. But these all have to do with being able to rectify the emotional inner states of our being. So thanks very much for coming today. See you tomorrow.